Sarah was 25 years old, living in a small town, and working at a local cafe. She had always wanted to speak English well, but no matter how hard she tried, it seemed impossible. She had studied English in school for many years, but when it came to speaking, she felt stuck. Every time she tried to speak, her mind would go blank, and she would freeze. Sarah was afraid of making mistakes, and that fear made her even more nervous. At the cafe, Sarah mostly spoke with regular customers who all spoke in her native language. Sometimes, tourists would come in and speak to her in English, and that made Sarah feel anxious. She was scared that if she spoke, she would make a mistake and sound foolish. She would avoid speaking to them whenever she could, hoping they would ask someone else. One day, at a local language exchange event, Sarah met Mark. Mark was an English teacher who had been teaching for many years. He loved helping people improve their speaking skills, and he had a friendly, relaxed approach to learning. Sarah explained her problem to Mark, telling him how difficult it was for her to speak English with others. "Don't worry, Sarah," Mark said with a smile, "you're not alone." A lot of people feel the same way when they start learning a new language. But here's something important. The key to speaking fluently isn't knowing all the words or getting everything perfect. The key is confidence. Sarah listened carefully as Mark continued, explaining that fluent speakers don't know every word, and they don't always speak perfectly. They make mistakes all the time, but they keep speaking anyway. Mark told Sarah that the real difference between fluent speakers and beginners is confidence. He explained that when someone is confident, they can keep talking, even when they don't know the exact word they need. And that, he said, is what makes them sound fluent. Think about it, Mark said. When you're confident, you don't worry about making mistakes. You just keep going, and that's how you get better. Sarah felt a little better after hearing this. She had always thought that to speak well, she needed to know everything and be perfect. But Mark was saying that mistakes were normal, and it was okay to not know everything. Mark then gave Sarah some simple advice to help her improve her English. He told her that she didn't need to change everything about how she studied. In fact, the first step was to start practicing speaking with confidence, even if it was just a little at a time. Mark suggested that Sarah start by listening to English every day. He told her to listen to simple podcasts or watch videos where people speak slowly. Listening was an important step because it helped Sarah understand how English speakers use the language in real conversations. Start small, Mark said. Listen to a short podcast or a story and repeat the sentences after the speaker. Don't worry about being perfect. Just try to speak along with them. This will help you get used to speaking without thinking too much. Sarah wasn't sure at first. She felt nervous about speaking, even if it was just repeating words, but Mark encouraged her. The more you practice, the more confident you will feel, he said. And confidence is the most important thing in learning a new language. That evening, Sarah decided to try what Mark had suggested. She found a simple podcast online, and she started listening. It was about 5 minutes long, and the speaker was clear and slow. At first, Sarah felt uncomfortable. She didn't want to speak out loud. But she remembered Mark's words about building confidence, so she repeated the sentences after the speaker. The next day, she tried again. This time, she felt a little more comfortable. She noticed that the more she repeated the sentences, the easier it became to say the words. She also realized that she didn't have to understand every single word to practice speaking. She was focusing on the sounds, the rhythm, and the flow of the language. After a few days of practice, Sarah felt a small change. She wasn't afraid to speak anymore, and she began to feel more confident. She wasn't speaking perfectly, but she was improving. Sarah had learned something important. It wasn't about knowing every word or using perfect grammar. It was about practicing, speaking, and being confident. As Sarah practiced more each day, she started to notice something else. She was listening to English everywhere she went. She would hear English words in the songs on the radio, in the TV show she watched, and even when people at the cafe spoke. She began to understand English better and better, even though she didn't know every word. Sarah still felt nervous sometimes, especially when she spoke with tourists who used fast English. But she no longer avoided speaking to them. Now, she looked forward to the chance to practice. She wasn't perfect, but she knew that the more she practiced, the better she would become. The most important lesson Sarah learned in the first few days was that confidence made all the difference. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about speaking, making mistakes, and learning from them. Sarah knew she was just starting, but she felt proud of what she had already accomplished. She was excited to continue her journey of learning English, step by step. This was only the beginning, but Sarah now believed that she could do it. She didn't need to know everything, she just needed to keep practicing, keep speaking, and, most importantly, keep believing in herself. As days went by, Sarah continued to practice speaking English every day. At first, she was unsure if it would make a big difference, but something started to change. The more she listened and repeated the words she heard in podcasts, the more comfortable she became. Sarah realized that she didn't have to be perfect. She just needed to keep going, even if she made mistakes. One of the most important things Sarah learned from Mark was that confidence was the key to speaking better. Mark had told her, the more you speak, the more confident you become. Sarah didn't believe it at first. She thought confidence was something people either had or didn't have. But now she started to see that confidence wasn't about knowing everything. It was about practicing and being okay with making mistakes. At first, Sarah was afraid to speak because she was worried about making errors. Every time she thought she might say something wrong, her heart would race, and she would feel embarrassed. She wanted to be perfect, but deep down, she knew that wasn't possible. Sarah had to accept that making mistakes was part of learning. As Sarah kept practicing, something amazing started to happen. She realized that when she spoke, her fear of making mistakes began to disappear. It wasn't easy at first. Sometimes she still hesitated, especially when she spoke with someone in English, but the more she practiced, the more confident she felt. Mark had given Sarah another important tip: repetition. When you repeat words and phrases, they become easier to say, Mark said. Your brain starts to remember them, and soon you will be able to speak without thinking too much. Sarah decided to follow this advice. Every day, she chose 5 common phrases to practice. Simple phrases like "How are you?" and "What is your name?" became her daily practice. She repeated these phrases out loud many times, even when she was alone. Sometimes, she would stand in front of a mirror and say the phrases, watching her mouth move and focusing on her pronunciation. At first, it felt a little strange. Sarah was not used to speaking out loud by herself, but over time, she started to feel more comfortable. The more she repeated the phrases, the easier they became to say. And soon, Sarah noticed that these phrases started to feel natural. She didn't have to stop and think before she said them. The words came out more smoothly. One day, Sarah was at the cafe when a tourist came in and ordered a coffee. She was nervous, but she remembered the phrases she had been practicing. The tourist asked, "What kind of coffee do you have?" Sarah took a deep breath and smiled. "We have espresso, cappuccino, and latte," she said, remembering the phrases she had repeated. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. The tourist smiled and said, "I'll have a cappuccino." Sarah felt proud of herself. She had spoken in English without freezing up, and it felt good. Mark had also taught Sarah about self-talk. When you don't have anyone to practice with, you can talk to yourself, he had said. Describe what you're doing in English, talk about your plans, or even just say your thoughts out loud. Sarah wasn't sure about this idea at first, but she decided to give it a try. Every morning, while she was getting ready for the day, she would talk to herself in English. She would describe what she was doing. "I am brushing my teeth. I am eating breakfast. I am going to the cafe." At first, it felt a little awkward, but as the days passed, Sarah began to feel more confident. Speaking to herself in English helped her practice without the pressure of having a conversation with someone else. It gave her a chance to say the words out loud, even if she was by herself. Slowly, Sarah's confidence grew. She wasn't afraid to speak anymore. She still made mistakes, but she was okay with that. One afternoon, Sarah sat in the cafe, thinking about how far she had come. She remembered the days when she was too afraid to speak to anyone in English. Now, she spoke every day, and she was improving. She didn't expect to be perfect, but she knew that with practice, she would continue to get better. The most important thing Sarah had learned was that confidence came from doing. It came from speaking, even when it felt uncomfortable. It came from making mistakes and learning from them. Sarah now understood that confidence wasn't something she was born with. It was something she built through practice. By the end of the second week, Sarah felt much more comfortable speaking English. She had made progress, and every small improvement gave her more motivation to keep going. Her fear of making mistakes didn't disappear completely, but it didn't control her anymore. Sarah was excited to see how much more she could improve in the weeks ahead. As she continued her practice, Sarah remembered something Mark had told her: the more you speak, the easier it becomes, and Sarah was beginning to see that he was right. Each day, she spoke a little more confidently, and each day, she was one step closer to becoming the fluent English speaker she had always wanted to be. After weeks of practicing every day, Sarah started to feel more confident in her speaking. She could use simple phrases easily, and her fear of making mistakes wasn't as strong. However, Sarah knew that to truly improve, she needed to practice in real-world situations. She could no longer just practice in front of a mirror or repeat phrases in her room. She needed to speak in real conversations, with real people, in everyday situations. One day, Sarah decided to challenge herself. She was working at the cafe when a customer came in and asked, "Can you recommend a good coffee?" This was the moment she had been preparing for. Sarah took a deep breath and smiled. "I recommend the cappuccino. It's very popular," she said. Her heart raced a little, but she didn't freeze. She spoke clearly, and the customer smiled and said, "I'll try that, thank you." Sarah was proud of herself. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was real. She had spoken to a stranger in English without feeling scared. She felt like she was finally starting to break through her fears. Mark had always told Sarah that real-world practice was the most important. "When you practice with real people, you'll learn how to react in different situations," he had said. Sarah realized he was right. Conversations with real people were much different than practicing alone. People speak faster, and sometimes they don't use perfect grammar. But that's okay, it's all part of learning. Sarah wanted to continue building her skills, so Mark suggested that she try role-playing. This is when you act out different situations in English, even if you're alone. For example, you can practice ordering food at a restaurant, asking for directions, or even giving a presentation. Role-playing allows you to practice what you might say in real situations without the pressure of actually being there. Sarah started to role-play every day. She would imagine herself in different situations, speaking English as if she were really there. Sometimes, she pretended to be at a job interview, answering questions about her skills and experience. Other times, she acted like she was on a trip, asking for directions to the nearest train station. She used her imagination to create different conversations, practicing the English phrases she had learned. One day, Sarah met a tourist in the cafe. The tourist asked her, "How do I get to the train station?" At first, Sarah felt nervous, but then she remembered her role-playing practice. "Go straight down the street and take the second left," Sarah said, just like she had practiced. The tourist smiled and thanked her, and Sarah felt a rush of pride. She had used the exact words she had practiced, and it felt natural. Sarah also found that listening to podcasts helped her a lot. She started listening to English podcasts that covered topics she enjoyed, like cooking, traveling, and meeting new people. After listening, she would talk about the podcast in her own words. Sometimes, she would explain what she learned to her friends at the cafe. Other times, she practiced explaining it out loud by herself. This practice helped her improve her speaking skills and allowed her to use new vocabulary. As Sarah continued practicing, she found that the more she used English in real situations, the more confident she became. She wasn't afraid to speak to strangers anymore. She didn't worry about making mistakes because she understood that making mistakes was okay. The important part was continuing to speak and keep learning from each conversation. One afternoon, Sarah felt especially brave. She had been listening to a podcast about different cultures, and she wanted to talk about it. So, she started a conversation with a customer who looked like he was traveling. "Where are you from?" she asked, nervously. The customer smiled and answered, and Sarah began telling him about the podcast she had listened to. She talked about the traditions of different countries and shared some of her thoughts. The conversation went smoothly, and she didn't stop to think about grammar or perfect sentences. She was simply speaking, and it felt good. At that moment, Sarah realized how far she had come. She had gone from being afraid to speak to using English every day in real situations. She wasn't perfect, but she was comfortable with her mistakes. She had learned to listen, repeat, and speak with confidence. Sarah had learned that real-world practice was the key to mastering English. Her progress was not just about speaking perfectly. It was about using what she knew and continuing to practice. Sarah understood now that fluency wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a result of consistent effort and real-life practice. She was excited for the future and couldn't wait to continue speaking more and learning new things. Sarah knew that with each conversation, she was getting one step closer to her goal of becoming fluent in English. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Sarah had taken the first steps, and now she felt ready to take on even bigger challenges. She had learned that speaking English was not about being perfect. It was about using the language, making mistakes, and improving over time, and she was excited to keep going. Sarah's journey to learning English wasn't easy, but it was incredibly rewarding. At the beginning, she felt stuck, afraid of making mistakes, and unsure of how to move forward. She didn't believe that she could ever be fluent because she always worried about perfection. But as Sarah started practicing every day, she learned a valuable lesson. Fluency isn't about being perfect. It's about being confident and persistent. By practicing active listening, shadowing, and repetition, Sarah was able to build her confidence step by step. The more she spoke, even when she made mistakes, the more comfortable she became. She learned that mistakes were just opportunities to improve, and with every mistake, she got closer to her goal. Sarah also learned to embrace real-world practice. Speaking with others, even strangers, allowed her to grow in ways that simply practicing alone could not. The most important lesson Sarah learned was that confidence comes from doing. She was not born with perfect English skills, but she built her fluency through consistent practice. It wasn't about knowing every word or getting everything perfect. It was about speaking, listening, and learning from each conversation. The more Sarah practiced, the more she believed in herself and her ability to improve. Through her journey, Sarah discovered that language learning is not a race. It's a process that takes time and effort. Every conversation, every mistake, and every moment of practice was a part of the learning experience. She realized that small steps lead to big progress. And as Sarah continued her journey, she became more confident, more fluent, and more eager to use English in her daily life. For those of you who are learning English, take Sarah's story as an inspiration. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Embrace them and learn from them. Confidence is built over time, so keep practicing every day, even if it's just a little bit. Start with simple steps like listening to English podcasts, repeating phrases, or speaking with others. The more you practice, the more confident you will become, just like Sarah did. Now, congratulations! By listening to Sarah's story, you've not only improved your English listening skills, but also gained important insights into how to become more confident in speaking. Keep practicing, and remember, you are on the right path. Here's a quick quiz for you. What was the most important lesson Sarah learned? A perfection is the key to speaking English. Big confidence comes from practice and learning from mistakes. Please comment with your answer or be below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more helpful English learning content. Your support helps us create more valuable lessons. Also, if you appreciate the content and would like to support us, please consider donating. We are working hard to provide you with free and quality learning materials, and your contribution will help us continue to create valuable content for you. Thank you for being part of our learning community.